some interesting conversations and topics with a couple of really fascinating colleagues from both UNDP and the UN. We have quite a few colleagues joining in as we speak. So maybe I can throw a question at folks who are already in the room. I'm curious to know, when you guys were younger, when you were kids, who was playing pretend? Who was building world stories? Who was doing pretend game? Can you plug in the chat if you were doing that when you were a kid? And what exactly were you building? What was the fantasy world that you were geeking out over? And God, I hope somebody says that they were doing that, because otherwise this question is going to leave hanging and you guys will get to hear about stuff that I was doing. So you've got JT Mudge. I'm still doing that. Fantastic. Give us a sense, JT. What are you doing? Fanfic and heroic fantasies. Fantastic. Who else? Who was playing pretend when they were kids? Boss built villages, cities, whole universes with Lego. And not surprisingly, Boss today does the same thing in the function of governments and the public sector. Funny how that works out. JJ was an explorer traveling through the mountainous regions. I wonder, JJ, if that's what you continue doing today. Who else? We've got about 50 people online. Surely there are more who have been playing pretend when you guys were kids. Waiting for somebody to say, I still am a child. We've got superheroes fighting bad people. Thanks, Mirko. All right, so maybe we can kick it off. The reason for the question is, in addition to getting to know some of you guys and kicking off on a bit of a lighter note, is that today we're going to be talking about something called speculative design, which in many respects isn't all that different to what we were doing when we were kids, where even though we might have been building fantasy worlds, reality was very much being threaded across those. My name is Millie. I'm the head of the Strategic Innovation Unit at UNDP. And I'm really excited to have a conversation about how can we turn weak signals of change into more choices for decision makers in global development. Today, you will hear initially from Simone, who is a designer at the Strategic Innovation team, and who led on an initiative called Blue Marble, which is a speculative organization that was built entirely on the basis of signals that UNDP staff around the world collated, and Naru and her team, and we'll talk about Naru and Chris in a bit, translated into a signal spotlight report. Now, many sectors use speculative design. For example, at the recent World Energy Forum, heads of state were served a receipt for the dinner in a form of CO2 emissions that they individually needed to offset to pay for that meal. So speculative design is about building experiences that may not be 100% real today, but they could be. And the intent is to help expand policy possibilities that we can consider. In this particular case, what type of food could you afford if you could only pay for it with CO2 reductions in your own life? It helps us evolve new ways of understanding problems. What does the world look like post-money? Generate very different types of conversations with our partners and evoke strong feelings. Again, think about when you were a kid, when you were building those fantasy worlds, because you create that virtue of experience that you can see, touch, and feel. In our case, this exhibition, Blue Marble, was featured at the Summit of the Future in the UN General Assembly last month. But it was originally designed to accompany 2025 Istanbul Innovation Days that will take place in March next year, and that will focus on institutional innovation. So you may have seen that the Danish government has set up, to our knowledge, the world's first mission-oriented ministry, kind of breaking sectoral approaches and bringing industry, jobs, climate, and environment into one to focus on green growth. This aligns with a lot of the work and field effort that we have seen our country offices do around system and portfolio approaches. And our hunch is that in the short future, we're going to continue seeing a lot more of these institutional experiments in an effort to rethink the ways of doing development and policy work. So Blue Marble is really our effort to stay ahead of the curve. But we will also take this conversation a bit further from Blue Marble and experiential design. Today, we have with us head of the UNDP Strategy and Futures team at the Executive Office in Nauru, and Chris Ernie, who is the head of the UN's Future Lab Network. Welcome, guys. We're thrilled that you agreed to spend a little bit of your time with us today. And we're really looking forward to geeking out on a couple of themes, right? So one, what does it take to leverage futures and foresight to inform organizational strategy and work? Two, how do we build political space for this work? And lastly, how do we combine futures and foresight with many other efforts to generate development intelligence that can help shape decisions, change what and how we think and how we behave in pursuit of strategic objectives that we might have. So this is what we have in store today for the next hour. And with this in mind, I will turn over to Simone, who will first introduce Blue Marble, what it is and what it looks like, what it does. And then we will dig deeper with Nauru and Chris. Simone, over to you.
Thank you so much, Millie. Let me move. And what I'm about to show you, it is Blue Marble, which it is an interactive physical exhibition. I will do my best to make you feel that you're there in person and show you a bit of some of how this organization works. And also we're gonna have a sneak peek on how it is in practice. So most important, Blue Marble, it is an international cooperation entity from the future. It is an organization built on principles of multi-species justice, radical transparency, and agency. First, we're gonna cover some of the building blocks of this organization, the governance model, collaboration, financing, resourcing, and then we're gonna see how this all binds together in how it operates. But you might be asking, why we need to rethink institutions. I think this is very well connected with this year's economics Nobel Prize winners, who also pointed out some questions on the forms of institutions we have and the linkage to the wealth inequality that we have, for instance. So we are putting out there Blue Marble, and this is a speculative, as Millie said. We are pushing here the boundaries of imagination, but without being completely delusional. So this organization was built extrapolating signals of change that are gathered and captured by UNDP staff around the world, and Nauru will speak a bit more about this. But in this publication, for instance, you can find countries, for instance, like Ecuador, giving legal rights to nature. So a river and a human being have legal rights in the constitution. This is the type of signals that we are extrapolating and turning out into this organization. Okay, so this organization, it is very different in multiple ways. First of all, it was founded at some point where we humans, we understood that we are not the most intelligent creature out there, and nature has way more advanced ways of operating and functioning. So Blue Marble was founded by a compact between plants, animals, and humans from the past and humans from the future. You might be asking yourselves, okay, but how do we create then a governance model where all of these are in the same level? So Blue Marble presents this and puts all this multi-species intelligence at the same level. And in order to do that, we need this type of device, which is a multi-language interspecies interpreter that help us communicate, multiple species communicate with each other, but also translating their demands into, and their perspectives into policymaking, for instance. This might seem a bit crazy, but it's not so far-fetched, since we already have AI algorithms being able to decode what animals say to each other. So we know that elephants give names to each other and so on. So moving on to how are these different ways of engaging at Blue Marble, new forms of collaboration. We are also proposing here a more, this relationship with nature in a more type of a symbiosis, because we understand that this organization could not work with a very top-down hierarchy. So we need a very different way of engaging. So here we have a mycelium network interface that gathers insights and help us monitor, evaluate, and allocate resources in real time. We also have here a cloud data garden to symbolize that Blue Marble stores data into the DNA of plants. And then you can extract, the data that you inputted there. That could be text or image doing genetic sequencing real time. So again, this is not super far-fetched, since there are already initiatives on finding ways to store data into the DNA of plants. If for those that are concerned, this is safe for them, so far that we know. Last, let me move to resourcing and financing, where Blue Marble also wants to move from this, let's get resources and money from the global north and distribute to the global south, and proposing more that we start judging, every individual, company, or country on the basis if you are doing good or harm to nature. So in order to do this, we created a fictional bioregion just to illustrate. Let me just move here a bit, sorry for the... So in this fictional bioregion, you can see you have a planetary health index, and countries are being judged with very holistic indicators. And if they're doing bad, again, they're going to be penalized or paid for a funding pot. We also created an uncertainty fund where automatic disbursements are in place every time, for instance, that a flood happens. What is interesting here is that all these funds are also distributed like data. So this is why we come up with a foundation router, right? Because we want to move to a more, without intermediaries type of distribution and real time of resources. Again, this is built on Esther Duflo, the economist that proposed that there is a moral debt. And this is the linkage between, charging everyone on the basis of harm or good. So I just walk you through it, the 3 building blocks of Blue Marble. In order to operate and have all these different functions, Blue Marble might need a very different instruments. So here we have just the archive of Blue Marble, which it is the last TOR ever used, so the last terms of reference. So this instrument, it is here just symbolize that it's not flexible enough. It might be obsolete if we want to have a different response to the complex problems that we are facing today. So we need different types of instruments. Okay, so now you have seen the building blocks. In the exhibition, we want to be very interactive so people can see like how this organization looks like in action. So we created a fictional bioregion here, composed by 3 countries, Ara, Zara, and Keida, and you are seeing that there is a river that cross-cuts them. This is also to symbolize that the issues that we face nowadays, they are cross borders. So if a country builds a dam here, it is also gonna impact the country downstream and so on. In this bioregion, we can also hear from some local stories from real humans that live there, and therefore, you could just go closer with the mobile. For today's webinar, I'm just going to show you one, so you have a sneak peek. So one of the locals is Anna, the Prime Minister from Ara's country. And you can see here that she's talking about how the Global Fungi Treaty on taxation was inspired by the mycorrhizal fungi. So this is just one example. We also want to show you the most exciting part of Blue Marble, in my view, which is how we make decisions or we find more possibilities for the challenges that are happening. So this bioregion faces multiple challenges, and Blue Marble helps to facilitate, but also gather intelligence from these plants, animals, humans from the past and humans from future generations, and turns them into possibilities, options that to overcome these challenges. There are multiple things that happens in this region. For today's webinar, we chose only one one session. We are even calling a co-creation session, to really symbolize this joint, effort between multi-species to find new solutions. We're going to show you one. At the end, people that are there physically could also input, their answers. Today's webinar, we cannot have this feature, but you can understand, that there is a question always for public participation at the end. Let me move to here, to the video, and let me play the video, and then I'll hand over to Millie. Let me go here first, put in full screen. Let me know if you can hear the music. Okay, so it's gonna start in a few seconds.
Our task today is to agree on a set of interventions on how to meet the demand for energy in Aras without causing damage in downstream countries. Peter, community leader.
We are concerned about Aras's plans to build a large dam that would devastate our water supply. Instead of one large dam, we propose a series of smaller dams across our 3 territories, sharing water and energy produced. This would better preserve river ecology and downstream flow while still meeting some of Aras's needs.
Supporting data. Proposed intervention. Replace single large dam with a series of 10 smaller dams. Ancestral elder as AI past generation representative.
I must share that we have experienced trauma from collapse of large dams. It extends across generations.
Fish as AI animal representative.
Even with smaller dams, we see a reduction in the flow of water. We need a fish-first flow policy to ensure water levels above 3 meters in key river sections to enable our migration routes.
Supporting data. Proposed intervention. Implement. Fish-first flow policy with 3-meter minimum depth in key river sections. Forest as AI plant representative.
We're worried reduced water flow will cause more saltwater intrusion in low areas. To mitigate this, we propose higher payments for ecosystem services to fund nature-based solutions like expanding mangroves and restoring wetlands.
Supporting data. Proposed intervention. Integrate 500 hectares of mangrove farms as nature-based solutions. AI future scientist as generation born in 2100 representative.
The ecosystem services approach would displace riverside communities. Instead, we propose investing in bioengineering to develop efficient algae or microorganisms for water purification. This would require significant R&D but avoids large-scale land use changes.
Supporting data. Proposed intervention. Invest in R&D to develop highly efficient water-purifying microorganisms. Ancestral elder as AI past generation representative.
Drawing from our traditions, we recommend using biogas from organic waste to generate heat for community use. This know-how has passed through the current generations.
Supporting data. Proposed intervention. Create incentives for communities to build biogas reactor-based systems for organic waste treatment. We are united by the core belief that the well-being of all species in the Aru bioregion must be prioritized. Based on all viewpoints, we generated a mix of interventions. 1. Build a series of 10 smaller dams across the 3 countries. 2. Implement a fish-first flow policy ensuring minimum water depths. 3. Create incentives for communities to build biogas reactor-based systems for organic waste treatment. 4. Integrate 500 hectares of mangrove farms as nature-based solutions. 5. Invest in R&D to develop highly efficient water-purifying microorganisms. We need your ideas to help us develop a diverse set of interventions that addresses the interests of all groups. Please provide your ideas using your phone.
So this is the part where we simulate, that every co-creation session is always have public participation, and where people can also put their own thoughts and then keep iterating, the possibilities. Let me pause. This is done, and let me close this.
Simone, thanks a lot for giving us a sneak peek into Blue Marble. There was a question that came into me that says, how can we at the country office level use Blue Marble to further the work with our partners?
Okay, let me stop sharing this. Okay, so I think in multiple ways, right? I think when we are gathering these signals of change that really can be used for turning into more tangible and helping us diversify the work that we are doing, mainly when we are also tackling very complex development issues. I can speak more concretely on the Paraguay, which is a country that our team is working very closely by. In Paraguay, where we are involved in doing a work around transforming the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It is a country where you see very high levels of informality. And in one of these deep dives research that we look for these signals and initiatives that sometimes they are not mainstream, they're isolated. But we found, for instance, one initiative that was giving first financial literacy in indigenous communities, and then only after, introducing, the possibilities of formalization or of their business. So there was a linkage that when we talk even about formalization, is not only about, opening, going through the bureaucracy and paperwork, but there's other aspects that could be, financial literacy, could be food security, and therefore it also helps us reframe that the work. It is not only about the work of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, but also now it is a work that it needs to be connected with the Ministry of Social Development. So in short, Millie, I think it's crucial that we keep trying to find and identify the signals of change, even weekly, that help us, translate them to more meaningful and contribute, for more positive, and long-term transformation in the context that we are working on.
Simone, thank you so much. So, colleagues, as you were able to hear, Simone led the effort to turn the signals of change into a speculative organization. So let's go back to the genesis of the story. Naru, you have spent quite a bit of time over the last 2-3 years building a network of UNDP colleagues across the world who have worked to continually surface emerging signals that have, among others, given life to Blue Marble. Could you tell us a little bit about what does it take to set up this type of network and how does it operate?
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Millie, for having me here. I think to your question, I think what it takes is progressive leadership, a little bit of crisis, and a lot of hard work. And I say that because the inspiration behind what we call our Futures Network, and particularly the horizon scanning capability that we have in UNDP and that we're continuing to build, came really from the time when we were developing our strategic plan and the fact that we were in the midst of COVID. So talk about crisis. And we were asking ourselves, how do you design for a moment of heightened uncertainty and complexity? So our team started gathering signals of change, looking at what the landscape of development would look like. And post-strategy development, of course, as we know, change doesn't happen in neat planning cycles as we would have liked. If we think about the future and foresight as the systematic study of change, we needed a mechanism for us to have our finger on the pulse about what's changing. We in development are in the business of change ourselves. So we decided to set up a system that allowed all of us within UNDP to be able to share what we're seeing, what we're observing, and making connections not just horizontally, diagonally, you name it, across the organization. Doesn't matter who we are, where we are, what we do. I think the fact that we are all over the world, that we have a 360 view of development, world view of development, is really our biggest asset in helping stay on top of change, anticipate change, and monitor change to see where it might go. So I think it's a process, right? It's work in progress, but I think the goal is not just to build the practice of doing this, and to build the capability of doing this and the culture of doing this. Foresight, in my mind, is a muscle, right? And it's something that you need to practice every day. And I think we see more and more interest in this. We started with 50 scanners globally doing this work, and we're now at over 400 colleagues from around the world who do this regularly, including ourselves. And this is a 60% increase actually from last year's scanners. And I think the interest in this work is one that's continuing to rise.
To grow. So maybe on that point, I'm curious to know, because we talked about setting up a network and building that muscle on the ground, but then you also put quite a bit of an effort in terms of synthesizing what comes from the field and across the world into some insights, some lessons, some intelligence that is meant to shape where decision makers look and how they look in certain directions. So could you tell us a little bit about how has the Signal Spotlight influenced decision makers, whether that's lessons from your work with the executive group within UNDP? You presented the report that G20 work with government folks in places like Nigeria. What are some things that you can share in terms of how does this land with kind of a highest decision makers in the government, and how do they view these types of insights in terms of their own decision making?
Well, I think it's interesting to see, in my perspective, a progression in how leaders see this type of work. Again, when I mentioned progressive leadership as being key to being able to have the space, the trust to explore what you don't even know will be the outcome of, it's because we luckily have that in UNDP, and the administrator had been exploring the future of development and bringing in external perspectives, different perspectives to look long term. And with that, we had, for example, with the first, I think, Signal Spotlight, I confess it was a bit of a strange thing. Nobody knew quite what it was. It wasn't a report. It wasn't the Human Development Report. It wasn't prescriptive. It didn't say what you had to do. So there was a bit of a timid, I would say, embrace to what is it going to lead. We talked about democracies autocratizing. We talked about OPEX for everything, not the typical topics one might necessarily put out there. And what we've seen since, and I think because it was somewhat well received, or at least didn't cause major issues, this year we were able to go further and to explore precisely that. How do we put it front and center in the development agenda of the G20 development ministers meeting? But I think in part, the reason we were also able to do that is because governments themselves are asking these same questions, right? I'd like to say it was a result of our work, but it isn't. There is a common and mutual interest in exploring the future. And the presidency of Brazil, the G20 presidency of Brazil, was doing precisely that. The thought is we're going through deep transitions. We need to think about the future. We need not just to think about the states of the future, but the role of the state in those futures. And that's exactly what Brazil was doing. So it was a sort of a marriage of interests that we were able to speak to what those futures look like, what other countries, governments, industries are doing, but also match that with a government that brought G20 ministers to explore those.
Yeah. Before going, Chris, I've got the same question for you, but in the UN context. But before coming to you, maybe Naru, a question that came through is, we're seeing a lot more requests coming in from different country offices to incorporate more scenario-based planning for CPDs, for portfolios. What are the tangible lessons that you think we can take from initiatives like Blue Marble to balance being speculative and pragmatic to help with the strategy, development, and implementation?
I think that embedding this type of work or utilizing it, whether it's for strategy or planning, it's all very contextual. There's no other way of saying this. It's about what works in your environment. It's what works with your audience. I confess you know, we've used scenarios in the development of our current strategic plan, and it wasn't an experience that I'd like to replicate. You learn from it. Not everybody understands the purpose, not everybody understands the need, and I think tailoring those to your environment and to your leaders is important. This time around, I think what we see, and we've had discussions in Latin America with all our resident representatives that we're very keen on doing scenarios and understanding how one goes about it. We have the highest demand we've ever had from country offices on how do I use foresight for the development of our CPDs. So we're developing a toolkit for that. I think the lesson is understand your context. You know, you spoke about Nigeria, and we had there, I think, some visionary leaders who thought, why don't we bring futures to newly elected governors who had never had to govern before? And we brought a foresight and futures session to them, and they were saying, how do I build this capability tomorrow? Can you help us? So I think there's understanding and the role of our offices translating the need into what can we shape and co-create with them locally. There isn't a single blueprint, I'm afraid, but what we're trying to do is to codify some of that, simplify some of that into toolkits, guidance, so that country offices can use it more easily.
Super, Nuray, thank you. Chris, shifting attention a bit to you and your context within the broader UN system, as the head of the UN Future Lab network, what allowed you to create and then nurture the political space for the type of work that you and your team do?
Very good question, and I'm not sure if I've got the answer to it, because we're only 20 months into this thing, but let me try. And thanks for having us here as well. It's a real pleasure to speak with you all. Look, I think there's a couple of trapdoors that we have to avoid, right? And I think that when we think about like political spaces in any organization, and you see it across the UN and outside as well, I think there's a bit of a danger that when we think political space, we immediately think about, you know, the head of the organization. So in our case, the Secretary General or Achim Steiner or whomever. And then it becomes this kind of, well, where can we wheel out the head of the organization, and they kind of come and say, oh, you need to do innovation, or you need to do foresight, or whatever. And that just doesn't resonate with a lot of people, because when you think about politics, essentially what we're talking about is egos and aspirations, hopes and dreams, which is also really central to how we think about futures and foresight, isn't it? And if you start to sort of frame it in those terms, then you see, you know, political space at all levels of an organization, from drivers right the way down or up to like heads of entity. And when you start to think about it on that really, really personal level, then you can start to think about values, and you can create spaces to do this really important work. You can help other colleagues and the spaces that they need to operate. And I really think that values are central to how we at least have been trying to kind of progress the agenda that we've got. And I won't speak on behalf of Norway, but I see what's happening at UNDP, and I firmly believe that there's, you know, that there have been some values conversations, and you can see that clearly in the work that comes through. And so for us, I think what we kind of fall back on or step forward with is values around collaboration, massive amount around humility, transparency, and when you start to look at those three values, and you add in diversity and inclusion and so on and so forth, then you start to see your role really as being very much as an enabler. When we talk about futures or strategic foresight, we don't use the jargon. We have to make what the agenda is very, very accessible. We have to make sure that we're not throwing tools and frameworks and all of the rest of it at colleagues, some of whom are working in really, really difficult conditions in some country operations, and they want to take forward the agenda. They want to create spaces to think more meaningfully about the future, sometimes in crisis situations. And so for me, then it becomes a much more interesting endeavor, because you're immediately taking a step into incentive structures, motivations. You're really trying to understand the people themselves, and as Narue alluded to, you're really contextualizing your service. You're offering, you know, the support that you can provide to such colleagues. And so then I think that you know, and we spend a lot of time with the Futures Lab, really understanding context. There's the, you know, the classic Einstein quote of, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 59 minutes understanding it. And that rings true, I think, to a lot of our work, isn't it, across UNDP and across the broader UN. So we spend a lot of time understanding what the existing processes are, what the existing decision points are, what the existing stresses, constraints, you know, things that really keep people up at night. And then we try and tailor any support, whether it's capacity building, training, knowledge management, which is a term I hate, but there we go, network building, support to decision makers. We spend an awful lot of time just understanding what that context is and when and if our support is needed. And some of the time we you know, we say, this isn't applicable. We don't think that this is something that we can help with, and we always provide that feedback, that transparency, that, you know, here are our own constraints as well. So I think for us, it's taken it right the way through to that very, very human level, because humans have always thought about the future. We've always been interested in how lots and lots of different people think about the future, and if we hadn't had this sort of ingrained in our brains since the beginning of human existence, I would hazard, then we wouldn't be where we are, both good and bad. So that's kind of been, I think, what we've sort of learnt over the last 20 months. Moving forwards, I do think that you know, you reach a point where it's unscalable. You can't spend so much time understanding the needs of every single entity you're working with, and therefore, you know, that knowledge exchange, that space when you're working with resident coordinators through their cooperation frameworks in 2025, or the World Meteorological Organization on their next multi-year strategy, then you have to, I think, at least, really build a lot of that knowledge exchange, that capacity development into every single process that you're working on, so that you're not only creating that capacity, that knowledge, but you're also creating even more of a groundswell across the organization to embrace this really important work that we're all doing. So that's my answer, Millie. I'm not sure whether it was a good one or not, but that's what I think.
It's a real one. I think it's a real one. And for as long as we keep it real, I think we're good. I'm curious to know, there is a new part of the agenda, right? So 6 transition pathways, and I kind of read this as an effort to really go systemic, to go beyond individual agency mandates and look at issues as they are outside. How does the work of your team influence this part of the agenda?
Yeah, it's another good but difficult question, and I'll probably fall flat on my face trying to answer it again. But look, when it comes to the 6 transitions, look, what we're talking about here is the need for more partnership, isn't it? More collaboration, more openness, more courage to question a lot of the underlying assumptions in this instance of, you know, how we achieve or try to achieve the SDGs in a really, really short time frame. So again, for me, it comes down to values. For me, it comes down to how can we use strategic foresight? How can we use a whole diversity of folks' thoughts about the future to convene and to plot these different pathways forward? And again, it comes down to, you know, where do we see alignment of, yeah, incentive structures, motivations, all of that, but where do we see the values align? And as soon as you again take it up to that values piece, then you see an awful lot more room for common ground. You also see a lot more room for conversations around, you know, where do our motivations diverge, and do we actually honestly do we have an opportunity to converge around maybe some areas which are proxies for other action? And so so where does our team support this effort? I think that somebody's trying to call me, excuse me, UNDRR. I think that our team's work here really is helping to create the safe spaces, to broaden minds, to bring together sometimes untraditional people and organizations to help to rethink, you know, these trajectories that we're on. And I do think that there's a danger that, you know, everyone kind of throws up their arms and say, oh no, we can't achieve the SDGs, we're so off track. But I think what's so important and inspirational about, you know, a world coming together to agree on these goals is that trajectory. And the envelope is still being pushed, and we're still making progress, albeit really slowly in some areas and in some geographies. But that's what we need to latch onto. And I firmly believe that when we're using futures thinking and foresight, that's where we have this X factor that you don't get from, you know, the kind of some of the ways that the UN has been operating over the last 75, 80 years. So I think it's that a bit of an X factor. I think it's a values piece, and I think it's that inspiration for perhaps non-traditional actors to come together and just do the right thing for the world.
Thank you so much. So maybe I will pick up the X factor piece, which really in our case has meant changing how we organize and how we work to be able to integrate some of these efforts into the country office work. Naruhe, we have a lot of colleagues on the call joining from the field, and in our work with them, we've seen, and this is not something that we really engineered or anticipated, but kind of seen post factum, that portfolio has kind of emerged as a vehicle that has helped country offices cohere various innovation assets, futures and foresight, experimentation, design, digital data, and so on, which is interesting, right? That country offices have kind of brought coherence to a number of investments that we have made corporately. From where you sit, could you point to some good experiences that you've seen in country offices who have leveraged this type of work that we're talking about today for more of a structural change?
Thanks, Millie, for the question. I think we've had, particularly last year, a lot of work with your team, right, in trying to help as country offices go through their portfolio design, portfolio analysis, to help bring an element of the work that's been done by our colleagues already, right, in terms of identifying what are the big trends and signals that can shape your strategic intent, whatever that might be, either now, but more importantly in the future, right? And whether it's Panama, Mozambique, Eritrea, Venezuela, Rwanda, we have some fellows in the call that have helped us to be able to have these conversations with country offices, bringing in and helping really just expand the mindset, expand the sort of aperture of what we're looking at in a country, to say, look, this might not be applicable or evident in your context now, but these are transitions, changes, and trends that are shaping development in different ways in other parts of the world. So do take them into account, whether relevant or not. Again, thanks to your team. I won't claim credit for understanding precisely how this work is evolving, but you know, we know that some countries, like country offices like Zambia, have been able to use this work, not just again to understand the landscape and see how trends like youth, climate, or digital impacts their work, but also to identify other leverage points, pain points that can be consequential for the work of UNDP. And in the case of Zambia, I think one of them was identifying the sort of increasing demand for critical minerals. You know, so it does really help to build a portfolio that's not just apt for the challenges of today, but also has built into the design consideration for issues that are becoming or might become more prominent in the future. This work, though, to work can't be done like a strategy at the beginning, and that's it, right? The point is, how do you monitor change? How do you continue to check in to see whether or not the evolution of signals, how things are changing, and what might you need to adjust in your strategy or in your intent, in your programs, in your portfolio, in your project, because of those changes around you. If you don't do that constantly, it defeats the purpose of that investment that was done at the beginning. And again, to revisit those shouldn't be something time consuming because we have at least the ability to be able to already look at the signals that everybody else is capturing for the collective.
Yes. Maybe to press on this point a bit, Naru, because one of the, a strength of UNDP is sort of global local, right? Being able to connect global trends with very localized context-driven offer. But what we do hear from colleagues in the field that a lot of times this presents quite a bit of a challenge, especially in times like October, November, December, where everybody's on a delivery train. And I'm not saying that this is either or, I'm just kind of reflecting back a reality that a lot of colleagues find themselves in, oftentimes looking at this type of work very much as a, nice to have. Whereas in what we know is that if we are to be relevant, this is an absolute must that we need to have as a part of our DNA. Are there some rules of thumb that you can kind of share from your experience with working with, not just UNDP and UN folks, but really sort of high-level government folks around the world in terms of how do we create space? How do we change certain structural aspects that would allow us to continually turn global trends into kind of very specific niche localized offer? And as a plug, this is very much a session, a clinic that we plan to run at the RR retreat at the end of the month, specifically on this particular question, which, I get that there is no clear answer, but curious to kind of hear some of your insights on this.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you guys like the Harvard Business Review, but the idea of being an ambidextrous, as they say, an organization, or being an ambidextrous leader. These are the terms that you often see in these types of publications. And I like some aspects of it, but I think even in the business world, wherever institution you're in, as I said, in part, the crisis of COVID and the crises that we live have helped open up the minds of leaders or make more explicit the recognition that we do need to think past, present, and future, right? But there's also recognition that that's not easy. Our team itself, in full honesty, debated a lot about, should we have strategy and futures together? We looked at many organizations around the world and how they structure this work, and part of my dream was, can we just focus on futures and have the luxury of doing that? And we debated, and I think the fact that we are one team was precisely to help embed foresight, futures thinking into decision making, but it also points to the need of having colleagues be able to understand change systematically as part of their work, whatever that is. I think something, Chris, that you've said when you talk about what are the capabilities and conditions necessary to make this work in organizations, to me, there's an element which is quite simple and basic, but it's I think you said it, it's humility, right? If you don't have an organization, if you don't have colleagues who think that, first, you can't predict the future, fact. Second, even if you're an expert on poverty, governance, digital, there are things happening around you that might not be within these domain areas that are going to impact your work. So being open to things that you don't know, recognizing what you don't know, and trying to understand how that might play out in your work, to me, is extremely, extremely critical.
Very good. Thank you so much. Maybe, Simone, this is just a heads up. There is a question from Alberto about how Blue Marble actually came into existence. So I'm coming to you next. But one question that came in for Chris is about the fact that I assume it's much easier to identify trends and analyze, but much harder to get more than one agency to work around a trend that might cut across different mandates. Any insights and experience in terms of making that work that has come in the 20 months of lifetime of your team, Chris? Not a hot potato at all. And I would say that this is something that's also very relevant for us in UNDP, but maybe not UN agency mandates, but actual program mandates within the country office.
Well, you see it everywhere, don't you? And I mean, like I came from UNHCR, right? And there's the brothers or sisters up the hill from IOM, and essentially what we're talking about is people, like, some people were forced to flee their homes and go to a different place. Some people had economic choices and so on and so forth. And it is really difficult because you know, whether you're talking about mixed migration, forced displacement, or you're talking about climate change or development or peace and security, like again, it comes down to like people. I don't think people don't want to work together, and I don't think any of our UN entities don't want to join forces, because the truth is there are not enough resources for any of us to deliver what we need to for the populations and people and communities that we're here to serve, right? And so we don't have enough resources. We certainly don't have all of the political space to get to where we would like to get to for the people that we're here to serve. And you know, the UN's made up of 193 member states who very often just don't agree with each other, and some of that is manifest in mandates, in conventions, in committees, and so on and so forth. But what I've seen work, and this isn't attributable to our team, I don't think. I think it's attributable to a broader focus on futures and foresight. What I see is and I don't want to sound trite, but this whole thing about nobody owns the future. Like nobody owns the future. And so as soon as you frame things, it doesn't matter whether it's 2 weeks into the future or 200 years into the future, you immediately open up people's brains into spaces that are absolutely just not possible if you're only thinking about the 1951 convention with relation to refugees or whatever. And so I think that where we've seen this work quite well, actually, was work that we carried out with UNDP in support of the Kenyan government's peace review of the peace building architecture, whenever that was 14 months ago. And what the team very, very, very carefully did was to use foresight as that convener, almost as a mediation tool, to bring together quite disparate groups, opposition and government, to talk about the future of peace building on a national, subnational and local level. And I think that there's all sorts of creative ways that we can use futures and foresight to pull together often disparate groups. And I do think that is something that we need to do more of across the UN, because I can't tell you the number of conversations I have with people who've been in the organization for 5,000 years, or UNV who's just arrived in South Sudan and they've been there for 2 months. Like there is this like absolute passion to try to work together in more coherent ways, really, because we've got a tough job as it is, and as soon as you try and go it alone, you lose all of this support in its many forms, from political through to budget and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think for me, again, I think it comes down to a bit of like, let's get real, let's use futures and foresight to create spaces where we can get real, and then let's sidestep some of these challenges that we operate in. Over.
It's really interesting point that you make, because we build a 2-day learning program around systems and portfolios fully based on simulation. And the fact that it is simulation, even though sometimes we build the simulation off of the data of the country that we're in, but it's still a simulation, it creates a very different space for much less censored conversation and perspectives that otherwise we would not be able to get. So I really appreciate that. I'm conscious of the time, so I would like to flag to Chris and Nerue a question from Drashko in the chat that I would come to you with. But before that, over to Simone on Alberto's question about how did Blue Marble come into the existence, and the question about the sessions and AI data sets. Simone, over to you, and then Nerue and Chris to close out.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for the 2 questions. Short, in a nutshell, I think all the concepts that we just presented, they are very much connected with the work that we are doing in the innovation team, in doing this transition, a different way of doing programming, that breaks the silos, that have a very long-term view. And that also rethinks how we collaborate between each other. And there is a big piece about intelligence, right? Intelligence from multiple projects, intelligence from multiple ministries, sectors, or entities in that system. So with Blue Marble, we want to extrapolate a little more based again on signals that are already happening. We found an initiative called Animals in the Room, that is already putting, animals' demands in a way that us not so smart human beings can understand, and also a way to get all this information, papers, scientific things that we know they're already there in a way that it is very, understandable by us, into the decision making as well. So this is the connection, from the work that we do, in the innovation team, and also Blue Marble. And I think it's important to point it out. Blue Marble, it is a travel exhibition. We found that this is very good as a conversation starter, because all of these things that we struggle or we are trying to figure out at UN and UN system is also what governments are also having to rethink. So this was the main purpose. Related to the AI part, what you saw, it was really a simulation. All the scripts were written by us. We are working on an AI system that is fully generated, that will be at the Istanbul Innovation Days. And of course, a tons of more careful thought needs to be put on that place, so it's not biased. But we are very much looking more to the positive side of a way of putting all this information out there in a way that is digestible and people can interact. So it's also in a familiar language, like how about we all here co-design and think about possibilities about the city that is not only with human beings, but with the nature and the animals that live there. So this is the things we try to connect. Perhaps over to you, Millie, because we are very short in time.
Super. Thanks, Simone. Maybe Narue, over to you on the question of AI and VR, generative AI and VR technologies accelerating our foresight capabilities. That's a lot of big words.
Yes, of course it came from Drazgo, and thanks. It's a very good question. I think there's a debate we keep having internally, and I think, for example, there are platforms out there that can generate 26 scenarios in a minute from signals captured elsewhere. There are platforms that capture signals of change using AI, and it's a big discussion in our team and with our leaders about, what part of the work that do you want to outsource to AI. My perspective is that you don't outsource the thinking, you don't outsource content creation. For us, building the muscle on how to capture signals of change is still, and what it means for development, it's still important. Having said that, how to bring scenarios to life, we just had, UNDP co-create this Hamburg Sustainability Conference, and where we used AI to generate scenarios around the future of global food systems that were remarkable, that we wouldn't have been able to generate. And this, thanks to our fellows, was done within weeks. And they brought to life scenarios about what the world might be in ways that, again, we couldn't have done otherwise. So there is a merit in helping visualize potential possible futures that now AI brings along. Again, the question is, to what extent do we use it as a co-pilot? To what extent do we outsource what parts of it to it? And I think that debate's going to continue.
Thanks, Narue, very much. Chris, over to you.
I'm not going to speak to AI because I don't know enough about it. We use it for a few different things in the team, including what Narue will have said far more articulately anything that I would have to say on AI. But what I did want to say, Millie, is I need to go and talk to one of our government counterparts in Finland. So I wanted to say three things. The first one is I cannot express how deeply grateful we are for the collaboration with UNDP. You have been absolute stalwarts, people that we rely on and trust for so much of the efforts at the UN Futures Lab. So I wanted to say that it's thank you to Narue and the team and of course you, Millie. Second thing is Blue Marble is one of those experiments that we strongly believe in, and I think that it takes courage and guts to put this together and also take it to the UN General Assembly and open it up for getting feedback from all manner of folks. So I doff my cap to you, Millie and Simone and the team in Istanbul. And the third thing is look, thanks for having us today. Deeply appreciate it, and what a great format to have quite a real discussion about some important stuff. So thank you from the bottom of our team's hearts for all of those things. Thank you,
Chris. Thank you so much, and we definitely look forward to doing more doing more together. Narue, also, I know that you're really busy, if for nothing else, then sort of spearheading the design of the next strategic plan. So we really appreciate your support and support of your team throughout this process, but also for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. Colleagues, thank you for taking the time to join. We are in conversation with many of you who are looking to bring Blue Marble to your own countries to either have conversations that are going to drive next development plan for your country, or that's meant to further certain strategic programs that you have, like youth empowerment programs. We're very excited to see where this leads to, because we certainly see Blue Marble as an evolving exhibit that can be modular and grow depending on who gets to work with it. So thank you very much on behalf of Simone and I to everyone, and onwards and upwards to the next conversation. All the best.
Thank you, Millie and team. Congrats on the Blue Marble again.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.